Good morning, everybody. I hope you had a good night, as we have another long day of adventures around the world. And I think a lot of shards are waiting for us for this first session. I can't prevent myself to tell you a short and real story. Some years ago, a collector of Chinese ceramics attended his first lecture at the Oriental Ceramic Society of France in Paris, a lecture where a lot of shards were shown and which was followed by an handling session of Chinese ceramic shards. He was so surprised as a collector. So surprised by our shards, our enthusiasm in front of them, and said, I have waited until my age to see people so excited by broken pieces. I can't believe it. The next speaker is Roberto Runco Sanchez from the National Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico, who will share his reflections on the blue and white Chinese porcelain excavated from the port of Acapulco.
Thank you very much to the organizers for this invitation. It's such a privilege to be here and to be able to communicate a little bit of the work that we're doing in Mexico in regards to Chinese porcelain, specifically the excavations in Acapulco. As you all know, during the colonial period in Mexico in the 16th century, a maritime route was established between the port of Acapulco, between New Spain, and Manila in the Philippines, which was, of course, a territory of the King of Spain. So this route that was established towards the second half in 1565, it lasted for 250 years. 250 years that Mexico and the Philippines were connected. When I say the Philippines, of course, it's a whole network of Asian connections that had been for previous centuries being developed. So it was Manila connected to Southeast Asia, connected all the way to India, in fact, of course, Japan, China, Indonesia. And Mexico, a connection to South America, of course, by land, then to the Atlantic, the Caribbean, and all the way to Europe. So many attempts during the 16th century were carried out from Mexico and from Spain to get to the other side of the Pacific Ocean. But finally, in 1565, the expedition of Legazpi with the sailor Andrés de Urdaneta managed to do the return route, inaugurating this 250-year exchange. No? So Manila, a big hub of Asia, and Acapulco and Mexico City, of course, connected. This had a profound impact in the culture of the Mexicans and, of course, in the Filipino, exchanges of aesthetics, exchanges of people, and several things. So what basically fueled this commerce was Mexican silver and Peruvian as well, but I will not go into the details of that, but basically was the American silver in exchange for all these woods like spices, textiles, porcelains. Somebody was saying yesterday about why porcelain was not so much traded in the 18th century. From the documents, I can tell you it's because textiles were the most profitable commodity, in fact. But before that, there was, in the 16th century, a huge amount of porcelains that arrived in Mexico. We have a galleon in the north coast of the Pacific in Mexico, the Baja California galleon, that since 1999, we've been working with Edward van der Porten, who's done the analysis of this collection. He's the responsible fellow for that. And finding what a cargo of the late 16th century is. The collection is 120 types, almost 2,000 pieces of blue and white, majority of plates and bowls. These are the most common material out of that collection. And so that's there a snapshot, a picture of the kinds of porcelains that arrived in Mexico in the 16th century. So looking at all this information, we started in the coast of the Pacific coast to find other sites where porcelain was found. And we were able to establish that there was a lot of smuggling in the route. So people would unload boxes before they arrived in Acapulco and take different routes than the Acapulco, Mexico route to other parts of Mexico, especially the mining towns where there was the silver to be exchanged. So here you can see that we have a little bit of Zhangzhou wares. Somebody was showing a horse very similar to this one, in fact, yesterday. And of course, the crack wares, which were the main thing. No? In 2017, we did a map of the Chinese porcelain excavated in archaeological excavations, of course, found in Mexico. And so we got a little snapshot. This is just a first attempt. We need to keep putting all the new findings that, but what served this map was to show the huge distribution. It was not only in the big cities or in the places of the mines, but throughout the territory. So there was a consumption of these porcelains throughout the territory. Another place that was important for us to look at is the port of San Blas, also in the Pacific. And it was a port founded by the Bourbon kings in the 18th century as a naval department. From here, all the exploration of Alaska and British Columbia was undertaken. The protection of the Pacific against enemies of Spain. So it was an 18th century site. But when we did our research there, we found out that there were also a lot of 16th century pieces, showing that the area of San Blas was also very active in this commercial route. So a bunch of course, 18th and 19th century stuff, but some pieces from the 16th century, 17th century, I'm sorry. Some Zhangzhou wares and some Jingdezhen. There's a Celadon, just a whole array of things. But let's get into Acapulco, which is the purpose of this talk. Acapulco, as the terminus of the Manila Galleon line, you would think that it's where all the materials were unloaded from the trip, and then there was a famous commercial fair that took place every year, where the merchants would come with the silver and exchange it for all the goods that were unloaded from the galleon. So there's very few important buildings in Acapulco from that period. The most important, of course, was the fort of San Diego, which protected the Bay of Acapulco. Acapulco, in the stories, in the accounts of the different travelers in the 16th century, was referred to as a very excellent port for anchoring, for navigation. But we also find in all the records that it was hell on earth to live in. So people could not really live in Acapulco, but it was a fantastic port that you could defend really well from your enemies, etc. So this fortress underwent different construction moments, but let's just say that in 1615 it was built, but a big earthquake destroyed the fort in 1776, and then the new fort that you can see in this picture was found. So our archaeological work concentrated first on the fortress. We started excavating test pits 2 by 1 or 2 by 2 along the outer part of the fortress, finding quite a bit of material. This is just the shape of the old fort versus the star shape that came later. No? So during these excavations, of course, all kinds of materials of daily life in the fortress occurred. We look at different parts of the fortress. And while we were doing this, a big breakthrough came along. In the downtown part of Acapulco, in the main center plaza, some work of infrastructure was being built by the government, so a 30-meter ditch. And in this ditch, we found a huge collection of Chinese porcelain. So overall, we have over 6,000 pieces of porcelain from this 30-meter ditch and from the fort. And so far, it's been very interesting to see that in the central part of Mexico, very close, in fact, to the sea, the place where all the materials were downloaded from the galleon, we're finding a lot of 16th century and early 17th century materials. Whether as in the fort, because it was rebuilt in the 18th century, we are finding 18th century and 19th century materials. So there's these two divisions. This is some of the work to find the older structures of the fortress before the earthquake, and we've been able to find pieces. But yet all the material, the archaeological material that we are finding, of course, military stuff as it's a fortress, but daily life objects as well. All this material mostly pertains to the 18th and 19th century. Food and then the ceramics, no? All different types of ceramics, many mayolicas from different parts of Mexico, botijas, some from Spain, from South America, showing all this different commercial activity. No? Of course, a lot of Asian stonewares. And so this is a picture of Acapulco in the 18th century by the Malaspina expedition. In that picture, you can see the central square of Acapulco. So that's where the galleon would tie up to that tree, and that's where they would unload the cargo. That's where they would carry out the Acapulco Fair, and that's the place where we excavated. So a little bit about the porcelains that we excavated. You'll see that many of these pieces have a lot of similarity with the pieces that we saw yesterday, of course, no? So you got a whole array of landscapes. Some of these pieces you will also find that are very similar between them, meaning that they come from the same workshop, probably from the same artists, which gives us a clue of why we're finding all these porcelains. Of course, a lot of motifs of animals, all kinds of animals represented, but the majority is deer. So many deer. I mean, the collection is full of beautiful deer of many different qualities. And this is one thing that struck me as one of the reflections that I wanted to talk to you about is the range of how you can decorate a deer, no? It's a very big range indeed, and which raises a lot of interesting questions. Who was buying these plates? Because of course, the envoy of the king, he would really like to eat in a nice deer. But then you had somebody that wanted also to eat in a Chinese porcelain plate, and maybe they would buy the other. So this is kind of the range we have from the very fine to not so fine. No, in fact, they look more like pigs than deer. But then we also found more deer, of course. Other bowls, for example, these large bowls that are also very common in all the export markets. And some of them, you can tell that they're from the same workshop too. And this fact that we're finding these very similar pieces together, our hypothesis is that from this long trip, the trip to cross the Pacific was over 6 months on a ship. But from Jingdezhen all the way to the coast, all the way to Manila, and all the way to Acapulco, of course, certain pieces would break in the boxes, no? Especially when you were downloading. So because this is the place where the Acapulco Fair took place, where the goods were unloaded, it's very likely that broken pieces were just thrown there in the sand, and then they would sell the pieces that were complete, of course. And that's the reason that probably it was the place where it was unloaded, where it was commercialized, and all the broken pieces just taken. Take, for example, this plate. This is also a very beautiful deer plate of Jingdezhen, very finely painted. And we have all these different fragments. So from all these different fragments, we can tell that there's at least between 3 and 7 of this same plate, which is identical, really, the design, everything. So why would you find in a collection so many of the similar ones? It's probably what I'm telling you. The Acapulco Fair happened, they opened the crates, broken pieces were just jettisoned there, and the full pieces, of course, sold. This is an illustration, so you get an idea a little bit of what it could have been. They've shown this a million times, but every time I look at it, it does feel right. So here's again all these different qualities, the different color of the blue, no, which of course, as people said yesterday, it has to do with the firing process, the qualities of the cobalt, no. But what we are trying to do is get the ranges, like from this point to this point, in the qualities, in the colors. Of course, there's a lot of polychrome, 16th century polychrome, like the ones in Baja California. So we're finding a lot of the same pieces as we have in Baja California. Some of these blue and white that are decorated with overglazed decorations as the ones we're finding in Baja California. And of course, Yangzhou wares, a lot of Yangzhou wares also coming along in the 16th century and being commercialized in Mexico. No, the usual suspects. No, you'll find this everywhere in the world. It's one of those motifs that just travel all over the place. No, little cups like the ones shown yesterday. The one in the sand is from Baja California, and the one to the right is from Acapulco. No, the Phoenix plate, I guess it's one of the most popular pieces that you can find in export ware of the late 16th century all over the world. Lots of them. Some stuff that looks very early indeed. Of course, it looks like a little bit maybe. So it's from the Wanli period, really, no? So you can tell the continuity of the styles, but it looks like very early stuff. And of course, crack in great quantities, crack plates, crack cups, no? Crack the chargers, and in fact, just a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of crow cups as well. That all these fragments, once you actually kind of tie them together, they amount to very little pieces. They're not like a lot of pieces, you know, so it could be 10, 20 pieces that were broken and jettisoned there, no? And then some interesting pieces that are kind of unique in the collection. So here we have, for example, a piece of one of the immortals. What, for a Mexican person in the 16th century, they would have had no clue whatsoever what these immortals' capacities were, but yet it was traveling. And this is one of my favorite pieces. We were talking about first orders. This is the last order. This is a last order to celebrate the crowning of Ferdinand VII, who ruled who became emperor king in 1808. And that coin was minted in Mexico to celebrate this. But he only lasted 3 months as a king. So this order went to China, and when it came back, he was no longer so it was probably jettisoned. So it's the last order. And pieces like this, for example, look at this motif here, no? It's a very Renaissance European motif to my mind, but already represented in this Jingdezhen blue 16th century, no? And of course, the Lanting, this is from Lisbon, this piece, and this is the one found in Mexico, no? And tells this fantastic story. I think it's just such a wonderful thing. Some pieces, for example, this one is restored. Who restored it? Now we know this one was not for commercial, but more for the daily use. So who restored it? And this gives us clues about the use of the Chinese porcelain in Acapulco by the local people, no? Who were these local people? What were they consuming this? And eventually in Mexico City, Mexican society, how they were using this porcelain. So somebody was talking about paintings. In Mexico, we need to do a catalog of all the colonial paintings that have porcelain. And there's a few 19th century with Animari, Nuestro Señor Christ of Chalma with his Jingdezhen bottles, blue and white bottles. So we need to do that. And also look at the architecture. Somebody was talking about that. We have a thing called riscos in Mexico, and there were these fountains, a little bit like they were talking in Portugal in the 17th century, that include Chinese porcelain. And this has been talked about a lot, but it's the influence of Chinese porcelain in the Mexican ceramic traditions. And you can see that there's reminiscences of the phoenix. Of course, the shape of this is totally Chinese. Division of panels like crack wares. I mean, some of the porcelain that we were looking at, you can see some of the designs that are 300 years later being reproduced in Puebla in Mexico, no? So this is a fantastic topic as well. And of course, to exhibit all these things, this is Acapulco, and this is a thing we did about the Manila Galleon, copying the Singaporean ACM idea of putting the ceramics on the ship. We did it with Chinese porcelains recovered from Acapulco, and the galleon is sailing on a sea of porcelain. So we're putting things in the museum for people to enjoy the porcelain. And in a few days, we're going to be inaugurating this exhibit with the ACM from Singapore in Mexico City, exhibit about the Manila Galleon, and a lot of the pieces that were excavated in Acapulco are going to be there present. So I think my time's up. I don't want to take more of your time. Thank you very much.
Now we came to the fourth speaker, Professor Cinta Crae from the Autonomous University of Madrid. The subject of her lecture is depicting China blue and white porcelain in paintings from Spanish museums and by Spanish artists in global collection.
Thank you very, very much for your presentation, Monique. I would like to begin by expressing my gratitude to the Art Museum of the University of Hong Kong and the Jingdezhen Imperial Kiln Institute for organizing this symposium. It's wonderful to be here among some of your wonderful colleagues and friends sharing information. Chinese blue and white porcelain was among the most coveted and admired luxury goods in the early modern world. Its distinctive beauty is reflected in paintings by artists active in the Spanish territories during the Habsburg period, some of which are still held in collections in Spain, and others can now be found around the world. Pictorial evidence constitutes one of the most valuable primary sources of information for the historian of ceramics. However, one of the main challenges it presents lies in evaluating its degree of verisimilitude. The pictorial art, shaped by the changing interest of artists and aesthetic trends, fluctuate between faithful representations from life and the inevitable use of imagination that is inherent to artistic practice. The idea of looking at Chinese porcelain through paintings in Spanish museum really began with a project on the Prado Museum collection. The aim was to identify and compare all the ceramic objects represented in paintings, whether European porcelain, Hispano-Moresque, and Asian pieces with extant objects. This study, soon to be published by the Consejo Superior de Investigaciones Científicas and the Prado Museum, is taking a long time, 5 years, but it's being printed now, involved an exhaustive review of some 8,000 easel paintings, either on display, in storage, or on deposit in other national museums in Spain, and led to the identification of around 30 works depicting Chinese porcelain. Ultimately, most of the paintings depicting Chinese porcelain proved to be 17th century Flemish paintings, where artists used oil paint to achieve remarkable precision with a luminous surface that gave special prominence to Chinese blue and white wares. These works fascinated the Spanish royal family and the nobility, like this still life by Flemish painter Clara Peters, painted around 1611, inventoried in Madrid in 1746 as being part of the collection of King Philip V of Spain. During the 17th century, Flanders was part of the Spanish monarchy, remaining under its rule until the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713. The paintings depicting Chinese porcelain first began to appear in the early 17th century, coinciding with the arrival of blue and white porcelain from the Wanli period at the ports of Seville and Lisbon. The Spanish Habsburgs were clearly enthusiastic patrons of Flemish painting. As a result, the Prado Museum collection, shaped by works once held in Spanish Habsburg palaces in Madrid, includes one of the finest and largest holdings of Flemish painting in existence, with nearly 1,000 works. By contrast, although the Prado preserves numerous Dutch still lifes, none of the latter depict Chinese porcelain. The most emblematic works in the Prado are the series known as the Five Senses, painted collaboratively between Peter Paul Rubens and Jan Brueghel the Elder, which were originally kept in the fortress of the Alcázar of Madrid. Across the 5 panels that comprise the series, the same blue and white porcelain vessels are repeatedly depicted in 3 of the paintings. The artists would have been familiar with these pieces, which were in the porcelain cabinet of the governors of Flanders, Archduke Albert of Austria and Infanta Isabella Clara Eugenia. The Infanta was an avid collector of such exotic luxuries, many of which she had inherited from her father, King Philip II of Spain, and part of the collection was later transferred to her palace at Mariemont in Brussels. Within the pictorial program, these porcelains function not merely as decorative elements, but really as emblems of magnificence, aligning Isabella's collection with the broader phenomenon of Kunst und Wunderkammer and reflecting the opulence of the Habsburg courts, both in Madrid and Brussels. As we can see in these details, in the sense of sight, on the table, directly in front of the portraits of the archdukes, rests a Chinese cracked bowl mounted in silver. Partially hidden behind the portrait is a blue and white cracked bottle, while a vase with bracklow panels with dia sits atop a cabinet. In a nearby cupboard, other blue and white pieces are stored: a stack of plates, a wine pot, and a candy, which my colleague, Dr. Canepa, identified in 2014. Painted in 1617, these objects closely resemble those recovered from the San Diego galleon, which sank in 1600 in the Philippines and now are preserved in the Naval Museum in Madrid. In the sense of taste presents a splendid credenza with 2 shelves where objects necessary for the table service are arranged: a blue and white bowl mounted in silver, a Chinese cracked dish similar to dishes from the San Diego galleon, Venetian-style glass goblets, German stoneware, and a richly adorned table with blue and white cracked dishes. We see one clearly decorated with 8 pomegranates and a 6-lobed dish with floral branches, very similar to pieces nowadays kept in the Louvre collection and the Groningen Museum. In the sense of smell, there is a Chinese blue-white jar decorated with quadrilobe panels of lotus and dia, and a cracked bottle behind. We can see that Jan Brueghel used the same vase once again for an exuberant floral arrangement fitted with a silver gilded mount on the foot. This painting, as we can see, is in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. Candies were repeatedly employed by Jean Bruegel and his atelier in a series of still life roses, with roses and tulips. By deliberately reorientating the vessel to conceal their mammiform spouts, the artist suppressed the most distinctive feature of these vessels. In doing so, they visually transformed exotic candies into a simpler vase type. To the contemporary viewer, what was in fact a rare and complex Asian object could thus appear as an ordinary flower vase, underscoring the interplay between exotism and familiarity in early modern still life painting. In the inventory of Philip II records 3 candies used as oil jugs, described as follows: 3 blue and white oil jugs with a spout protruding from the belly in the manner of a teat, through which the oil is poured, valued at 12 reales each, equivalent to 3 days' wages for a laborer in Madrid at the end of the 16th century. Likewise, in Taste, Hearing, and Touch, another painting in the Prado Museum executed in 1620 and conceived as a replica of the earlier series, the artist represents a 3-shelf credenza with cracked blue and white bowl and several simple cracked dishes arranged on the table, similar to vessels recovered from the San Diego shipwreck. In Sight and Smell, Jean Bruegel the Elder, together with other painters of his circle, once more employed the same porcelain vessels in conjunction with other exotic objects, such as you can see here, shells contained in a Chinese lacquer box and Indian langur monkeys. Such recurrent deployment of identical items underscores the degree to which these artists systematically incorporated the same repertoire of objects across their compositions based on oil sketches of the pieces. The still life painter Clara Peters began her career in the first decade of the 17th century in Antwerp, a strategically located city on the Scheldt River, which was an important international economic hub and home to a thriving community of Spanish and Portuguese merchants. In this magnificent still life, the artist included a cracked dish containing olives. We can see here, and in another of her still lifes painted in 1611 and first recorded in the Spanish Royal Collection in 1666, the artist arranged a stack of white clapmuts and plates of varying sizes, one on top of a large, you can see a stack of plates on top of a large blue and white cracked dish with paneled decoration. Here we can see the extant piece, which the Groningen Museum was very, very nice to provide an image of the piece. Joris van Son was another Flemish still life painter from Antwerp. He likewise employed Chinese clapmuts in his composition. In his still life, we can see a blue and white example, which is prominently displayed. The works of both artists show that this particular type of porcelain shape became a favorite motif in Antwerp painting, reflecting the taste for Chinese imports that reached the city through Iberian and Dutch trade routes during the mid-17th century. In other paintings in the Prado Museum, Flemish artists of the 17th century went out their way to underscore the fragility of porcelain, deliberately placing blue and white vessels in precarious situation, perched dangerously close to dogs, cats, or monkeys, with the inevitable risk of shattering these precious objects. At times, they can, as we can see, thanks to them, we can now study the shards of the porcelain. We are so privileged. We must thank the animal for doing that. So at times they even stack them in absurdly unstable positions, for instance, balanced on top of a melon and near some monkeys, as we can see here in this last painting by Franz Snijders. See, what a place to put a Chinese bowl near a monkey. Seville became became the only authorized port to trade, to trade with the New World. So in that city, Francisco de Zurbarán, one of the first Spanish artists to depict Chinese porcelain, worked for part of his career. In his Sleeping Virgin Mary, he included a cracked bowl decorated with spotted deer. As we've seen in this lecture, Teresa was showing a similar piece yesterday from the Santa Margarita. Today, Roberto also was showing from the excavations from Acapulco. And in this case, the artist is showing this bowl with 3 flowers: a rose, symbol for love, the carnation for fidelity, and the lily for purity. Shards have been recovered of this type from many shipwrecks, from Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish, from the San Agustin in Northern California, from so many that it's incredible. And also we have this fantastic piece now preserved in the Metropolitan Museum with an unusual early silver mount, which was probably seized by the English from captured Spanish vessels. I think it was seized, not traded, but you never know. Now as it was preserved in Berkeley House, and now in the Metropolitan Museum. One can also find evidence of Chinese blue enamel porcelain in the paintings of Juan van der Hamen. He belonged to the second generation of a Flemish family from Brussels who had settled in Madrid, and he became especially well known for popularizing still life painting at the Spanish court and amongst the Madrileñan nobility. In one of his works, he arranged on a set of shelves a composition of artichokes, flowers, various glass vessels, and a Chinese cracked dish filled with cherries. A comparable dish is decorated with sunflower motifs in drop-shaped panels. During the reign of Chongzheng, the last Ming emperor, China was marked by acute political and economic crisis. Nevertheless, the production at the private kilns of Jingdezhen continued, with the majority of the wares decorated in underglazed blue. This porcelain, which remained highly sought after in international markets, circulated widely through Asian and European trade networks and are frequently represented in mid-17th century paintings to testify to their enduring global appeal. Adriaan van Utrecht was a leading still life painter in Antwerp who worked in the first half of the 17th century. He produced works distinguished by their large scale and sumptuous detail. Such paintings reflected the prosperity and cosmopolitan outlook of their patrons. In Elada, a high transitional incense burner from the Chongzheng reign is depicted as a container for black currants, a vessel probably made for the Chinese domestic market. The decoration is spread openly across the surface against clean backgrounds, often inspired by prints and landscape painting. According to Dr. Canepa and Catherine Butler, this vessel, with its shallow, rounded size and gently flaring rim, was already being made in the Tianqi reign. The bowl next to it, with floral branches, dates to the Chongzheng reign as well, since the painting itself dates from 1642, although both its shape and decoration continued to be made in the Shunzhi reign. This still life painting, executed by an artist from the Circle of Egens, includes a vessel produced for the Dutch market, modeled after German lead glazed stoneware jugs. Shards of this type of picture have been excavated at the Shibaqiao kiln in Jingdezhen. Peter Ball is best known as a painter of hunting scenes and still lives of birds and game, working in the tradition of Snyder's. He began his career in the late 1640s, producing works that at times incorporated Chinese blue and white porcelain, both cracked and transitional wares, as seen in this painting. A ewer measuring 37 centimeters in height derives from metal prototypes which were used in the Islamic world. The decoration with stylized tulip sprays on the neck is characteristic of the period and reflects Turkish influences. I would like to end this talk with a Spanish painter, Juan de Zurbarán, son of famous Francisco de Zurbarán, who often included cracked and transitional porcelain in his still lifes. These cups, about 10 centimeters high, were very popular at the time. They arrived in Spain from around 1630 and were mainly used for drinking chocolate imported from New Spain, today's Mexico, and became one of the favorite beverages in Habsburg Spain. The cups themselves were inspired by European silver designs. We know that Spanish queens used them for their private afternoon refreshments. For instance, Queen Maria Louise of Orleans, first wife of Charles II, owned more than 100 Chinese chocolate cups when she died in 1689. Pieces of this kind have been also found aboard shipwrecks of galleons returning to Spain, like Nuestra Señora de la Limpia y Pura Concepción, which sank on its way from Veracruz to Seville. And in this last painting by Antonio de Pereda, we actually see how the rim of this transitional cup has broken from use, a vivid reminder of how just fragile these pieces really were. Beyond their beauty and rarity, these blue and white porcelains are fragile witnesses of a shared history of worlds entwined. Their painted presence on canvas reminds us how, throughout the Hispanic monarchy's territories, Chinese ware became part of daily life and visual culture, weaving Asia, the Americans, and Europe together through art, trade, and taste. Thank you very much.